Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Hello there, and a very warm welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast. My name is James Meads. I am a digital procurement expert and former procurement practitioner who spent over 16 years in corporate procurement before I decided to go my own way and start my own business. Procurement tech is my passion because I often felt within procurement a little bit like a very well-paid admin assistant, if I'm completely honest. And that's how I got into this space. So what we're going to talk about today is quite relevant to that, because I want to explore which categories of ProcureTech currently excite me and which ones don't, in terms of where I see the market going, but also how relevant the different categories are to, well, the challenges that you all face out there in the big wide world of corporate procurement. So in our software database, and if you haven't come across this, then go to app.procurementsoftware.site, where you can search and filter over 440 solutions in the procurement tech space. So if you're looking for something specific, you can just go on our website and say, hey, I'm looking for, contract management solutions that are at a high level of maturity and that are focused on mid-market businesses. And then it will show you a list of all of those. And then you can click on each tile and look at a detailed description of exactly what they do. If you need a little bit more flexibility in terms of your search criteria, we also have a paid access backend database that you can purchase access to as a subscription that will give you more search and filter criteria, and also the ability to copy and paste data from that database into Excel or Google Sheets or whichever spreadsheet application that you use. So there are two tiers of product depending on what it is that you're actually looking for. And in our software database, we have 23 primary categories that we've used as essentially a taxonomy to divide up those different segments of the procurement tech market. And well, some of these primary categories excite me and some of them don't, to be quite honest with you. So this is what we're going to tackle today. And I think you might be surprised at which ones I think will see the most traction, because it's not necessarily what I call the sexy stuff that is fawned over at a lot of events and conferences. A lot of times it's more the stuff that solves bread and butter issues that we face in procurement. So without any further ado, let's dive into which categories of ProcureTech I think are or will be hot, and which ones that I don't think will necessarily be around for too long. So going to start with the ones that I think are going to be hot or that are going to be very popular and that we'll see some significant growth in. The first one is spend analytics. So not having this is almost inexcusable, especially if you have multiple ERP systems that you're pulling your data from, or especially if you're, let's say, an upper mid-market or an enterprise organization. Because let's be honest, if you're a relatively small procurement organization and if you don't have much complexity in terms of where your data is coming from, for example, if you only have one ERP, for example, then getting decent spend data is not as big of a challenge. But any other organization, if you don't have this, it's kind of being a ship and a captain and a crew without a compass. So let's say the ship is your company or your organization, and the captain is the CPO, and the crew are your team of category managers. And you don't have a compass. Well, I always liken it to managing spend without a spend analytics platform or decent spend data is a little bit like trying to sail in the fog without having a compass. And while enterprise spend analytics tools have seemingly been around forever, I think Cievo is probably the oldest one out there, and they've been around since about 2003, 2004, if my memory serves me correctly. Where we're seeing a lot of growth now is among spend analytics tools that are focusing on companies that are typically smaller than the ones that would buy one of the big source-to-pay suites that have spend analytics modules, or one of the better established spend analytics tools that have been around for a while, like a Cievo, for example, that tends to focus more on enterprise customers. And I think these tools that are, in most cases, cheaper and faster to implement, will see a lot of growth. I think if you're a business that's, let's say, $100 million-ish in revenue up to a few billion, that has not invested in spend analytics technology prior to, that's where I see the biggest growth in this sector. And as new technology comes onto the market, it gets better at classification. It's leveraging the latest offerings in AI, and it's building that in native from the ground, from scratch upwards. So naturally, those tools are going to be A, more user-friendly, and B, going to be leveraging the latest technology. So I'm quite excited about spend analytics as it goes sort of further down the market in terms of affordability and relevance. Second one is e-sourcing. And this probably goes without saying, if you're going to run tenders and save money, then ideally you need a good e-sourcing tool instead of trying to manage that in emails and spreadsheets. Although while it's not optimal, you can certainly do the job using email and spreadsheets. It just doesn't give you much good historical data in terms of repository and in terms of how you manage onboarding and having a central single source of truth for all of the supplier data and compliance and responses and everything. So there are still a lot of old legacy solutions out there that are pretty uninspiring, but there's also a number of new breed of solutions that are coming onto them or that have come onto the market. And I think the business case for e-sourcing is easy, right? So as long as the solution that you implement has high levels of adoption, I think there's plenty of space for new entrants to come into this market, because as long as you're able to sell it and ensure that you retain your customer base through getting good levels of adoption, there's a pretty much unlimited marketplace for e-sourcing tools of all shapes, sizes, and prices. So that's the second one. The third one that I think we're going to see real growth are niche industry or country specific solutions around the procure-to-pay and source-to-pay space. I think specifically focusing on the lower end of the market. So SMEs and the lower end of mid-market, I think is quite underserved. And yes, there are solutions out there that are already serving that market. But when you consider, there are maybe 10 to 15 solutions out there that currently serve that market. If you think in most countries, small and medium-sized enterprises make up, almost 80, 90% of all businesses that are registered. I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but in the UK, it's something like that. It's around about 90% of businesses that are registered by Companies House in the UK are businesses that employ less than 50 people. I'll have to check that actually. Maybe I can pop it in the show notes if I'm able to fact check that. But it's a huge number of businesses out there. And the point that I'm making is that if there are only 10 to 15 solutions out there that are serving that market, there's a huge scope for new solutions to enter, especially if they're focusing on one specific country or one specific industry sector. So I think that's another area that we're going to see a lot of growth. And, I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is there and, actually look at growing that as a channel in emerging markets, because I think this is going to be huge. The market, it's a bottomless pit in terms of potential customers for this type of technology. The next one, and this is one that's pretty new in terms of it being category out there of procurement technology, and that is AI-driven co-pilots. These are things that can help with a lot of day-to-day repetitive and mundane tasks that may not traditionally be suited to robotic process automation. So let's dive into this a little bit more. Robotic process automation has been really, really popular with things like procure-to-pay accounts payable automation, sending documents to suppliers based on a specific trigger, approving documents based on a specific trigger. Anything that can be manually programmed in terms of a workflow is very, very well set up to robotic process automation. But where the workflow is somewhat less predictable, this is where AI copilots can really come into their own. And there are a few examples out there. There's a solution out there now that is focused on taking free text purchase requests and then using AI to help direct that to the right buyer and convert that into a purchase order. There are solutions out there that help to facilitate the purchase order acknowledgement and automation process around volume purchase orders that ensure that purchase order confirmations and updates come in. There are solutions out there that can track changes to purchase orders in terms of where they are in the supply chain, or if there are perhaps changes to order quantity or delivery dates. And there are also solutions out there that can take free language input and then essentially guide someone through a sourcing event and use AI to guide around what type of sourcing event is best. You know, is it 3 bids and a buy? Is it a catalog purchase? Is it putting something into a more formal RFP? So there will be more use cases that come out of the woodwork when it comes to this. But I think these AI-powered virtual assistants or co-pilots that can do tasks that are not suited specifically to process automation, we're going to see much more growth in this area too. The next one is autonomous sourcing and negotiation. So kind of a little bit related to what I was talking about in the last segment around AI-driven co-pilots. Anything that can help and assist procurement to do more with less. So ultimately, that's probably going to be more towards tail spend management and non-complex, non-core spend, particularly one-time buys that historically you can't put through catalogs or through process automation because of the spend threshold may require a procurement person to touch it and approve it and monitor it. Here you've got tools like Pactum and Fairmarket and MySupply and Orchestro, just to name 4 examples that are in this space and that already have use cases that are helping with this. But I think we're going to see more entrants come in, and I think that solution providers that are already here are going to flourish and grow because procurement is not getting bigger teams and they're getting more and more workload that they're having to tackle. And anything that can help them to automate or to speed up the cycle time of dealing with some of these non-critical purchase requests that are not something that can be purchased through a catalog or on a P card is going to be a big area of growth. Then we've got sustainability tools. So there are certainly a lot of these already, and I do think that there is going to be some consolidation within this market, but ultimately the trend is that procurement is going to be forced to buy software to help them here. Procurement is already under-resourced, as I already touched on, and if sustainability is going to ultimately sit with procurement to deliver, and just as a side note, I'm not 100% convinced that procurement will lead all of sustainability. But I guess that's a topic for another day. I do think procurement, though, will almost certainly be asked to lead or is already leading the whole measurement around and reduction of Scope 3 carbon emissions. So how is procurement going to lead and deliver this with everything else that they have on their plate? The answer, they're going to need to leverage technology and some software to help them speed up the ability to collect and analyze and tackle all of the data that's out there, because we just don't have the bandwidth to pull that data ourselves. And honestly, I think a lot of procurement leaders out there are scratching their heads thinking, where do we start? So it's going to be cheaper ultimately to invest in some sustainability software than it is to bring in a team of external consultants to manage it. I think when procurement leaders start to look at, okay, what is the cost going to be for me to do this with the different options, whether it's hiring internal headcount, good luck if you're going to be able to do that, or investing in tech or hiring consultants, I think tech will come out as being the most cost-effective option there. And then the final one that I've got in terms of areas that I think are hot are supplier relationship management, or SRM, and vendor lifecycle management, VLM, which are kind of related, but are not exactly the same thing. Why do I think this is going to grow? Well, quite simply, ERP systems are not fit for function when it comes to supplier management. And likewise, if you maybe have an existing source to pay tool, they're not really effective either. None of the modules that I've come across in any of the well-established, mature source to pay suites have anything like the type of functionality that you need to do effective SRM. And you're going to need all of that data in one place. If you're using separate systems for things like contracts, quality performance, ESG, third-party risk management, even if you're one of the lucky ones that has tech to help you with some or all of those different sub-requirements, it has to all be brought together somewhere if you're going to be able to do effective SRM. And ultimately that somewhere, if you will, is going to be an SRM system. I can't imagine that in 5 years' time, any mid to large enterprise that is profitable and successful and is on a growth trajectory will still not have some type of SRM technology solution. Sales have had customer relationship management, CRM platforms for years and years. So this just seems like the next logical cycle for me, that there has to be some investment and some movement here, especially as compliance requirements increase and we need to know more and more data on our suppliers. So they're all of the things that I think are hot. So let's move on to which ones I'm not so bullish about. Love to get your feedback, actually, if you agree with me here. So first one is contract lifecycle management, or CLM. And let me caveat this first, that there are some great contract management tools out there. I'm just not that enthused by the whole pre-signature contract authoring, contract workflow routing, and contract signature platforms anymore. That to me is not really contract lifecycle management in the way that I as a procurement professional would see it. A lot of that is what generative AI can do now. So, I mean, yes, there's the whole argument around data privacy in terms of using open tools like ChatGPT. And don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that you do. But contract redlining and contract clause libraries can be done by generative AI. And then the whole workflow automation piece around contract approval and signature, that can be done using no-code, low-code applications that don't cost tens of thousands of dollars. So I think we're going to see almost certainly some consolidation in this market. Where I am excited about contract management in general is around combining this with a more wider scope of supplier relationship management more holistically. What do I mean by that? I mean more around the post-signature contract lifecycle management. The true contract lifecycle management in procurement is usually post-signature, because that's where all of the leakage comes, right? If you've got a master services agreement at a corporate level, but you're not really able to track whether the different production sites and country offices are implementing the terms of the contract, and you can't really see whether the local supplier entities are invoicing you according to the terms of that contract. This is where I think we're going to see real growth potential in the contract space. And I want to shout out Gatekeeper actually as one that seems to be moving the closest to this type of capability. Birdseye, who we also had on the podcast last year, is another one that focuses specifically on post-signature contract management and sort of aligning this and getting stakeholders really involved in that input. So definitely think there's going to be some movement here, but perhaps less so in the more traditional way we might have looked at contract management in the past. And some of the legacy tools, I think, may disappear or become less relevant in the future. The other area that I'm not so enthused about are the second tier source to pay suites. Let me just explain what I mean by that. So the likes of Coupa, Ariba, iValua, all of the big what I would call the first tier in terms of the ones that have the biggest market share and are going after the largest enterprise level customers. I think they will all survive. They might suffer some damage to market share and revenue per customer as the market becomes more competitive, but I don't see any of them really going away. When you go a little bit further down market, this is where I think some of them might disappear. And I certainly don't think that they will be able to raise additional investment rounds if they're dependent on venture capital money to get their next round of funding. I think for these second tier source to pay suites, they need to have a really good innovation roadmap, and they need to have a really good partnerships and alliances strategy to maintain their relevance. And some of them do, don't get me wrong. I was at Onventus's internal customer conference in Germany last month, and I saw a demo and had a really good chat with their head of product. And they, for example, definitely got it right. They've got a really good, strong innovation roadmap. They've got their finger on the pulse with what they need to build into their product, but they've also got a really strong partnerships network for the areas that either they don't want to or they're not able to tackle within their product. So I'm definitely not saying all of them are going to go away, but I think definitely think there's going to be some consolidation in the market. And for those that don't have a strong innovation roadmap or partnership strategy, I wouldn't want to be a salesperson working for those companies right now, unless they've got such a big market share in a specific geography or industry sector that will protect them for what's coming. And then the final one that I'm not very bullish around is B2B marketplaces. Why do I think that? Well, because I think that AI-driven supplier scouting tools and intake and process orchestration tools are going to make these kind of irrelevant. What is the USP of a B2B marketplace? If they don't have one other than consolidating a lot of punch-out catalogs or web shops in one platform, then I don't really see how they can survive if you can go out and just buy supplier scouting tools that is an autonomous sourcing or AI copilot that can help you then both find a supplier and send out a simple RFQ to get some quotes. And that's even before we consider the traction that someone like an Amazon Business, for example, could have if it ever decided to go and completely enter a new market where they're not currently active. So unless you've got a really special offering in the B2B marketplace segment, I wouldn't be investing my money in that. And I certainly wouldn't want to go and work or promote one of those businesses because I'm not convinced that they're going to be around for a huge amount of time longer. So let's conclude then. What have we gone through? If you're worried perhaps whether your procurement tech provider that you're considering or maybe that you've implemented will make it through the next few years, or maybe if you're concerned around you've decided that you want to invest some money in digital procurement technology, but you're not really sure where to go, or you're a bit confused as to what's out there in the market or the latest industry trends, and you don't want to go out and buy something that could be obsolete in 2 or 3 years' time. Before you make that investment or final decision, reach out to me, book a call, let's have a chat. Every single use case is going to be different. So what I would recommend or suggest for one potential client is going to be possibly completely different for what I would recommend or suggest for another one. We can help you understand who's out there, what their relative strengths and weaknesses are in relation to the other players that are in the market, and also if they're in a segment of the procurement tech space that I'm particularly bullish on or not, as the case may be. And I will justify why that is. So there's a link in the show notes to book a free half-hour consultation with me. I always do the first initial half hour for free because I need to get to know you a little bit more and what your requirements and desires are from your digital procurement transformation before I can then suggest potential next steps. So would love to talk to you if you're in that space and are considering an investment but don't really know how to approach it. So that's it. That's what I think is hot and what I think is not. What do you think? Leave me a comment or drop me a DM on LinkedIn. Love to hear from you and get your thoughts on where you think the market's going. I'm not claiming that I'm right, but I've certainly studied this in a lot of detail and can back up why I think the areas that are hot, and why I think the areas that are not so hot are not so hard. Thank you very much for listening. Always a pleasure to have you with us on your digital procurement journey. And it's always a pleasure to bring you these shows. Thank you for subscribing and listening wherever you are in the world. And until next week, take care and bye for now.